Hey, what's up, guys? Ken here from the Retro Toyscapades channel. I hope that everyone's doing good out there. Now, I've been doing this sub series on the channel on comics collecting, specifically comics collecting in Malaysia, where I live. And today I wanted to talk about the time that I remember as a kid buying comic books for myself and with my own money. And what prompted this was because I found my old copy of the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade movie adaptation comic book from 1989. Now, I was about 12 years old in 1989 when the movie came out. I watched it in theaters and I loved it so much that I couldn't wait to watch it again on VHS or videocassette when it would come out. Now, back then, it wasn't as easy to watch movies repeatedly in the cinema, especially when you're 12 years old. Getting your parents to take you for just one movie was considered like a birthday treat or like a major family event, a really special occasion. So the next best thing to rewatching a movie a few months later would be to, hit to the point when the videotape comes out and to rent a copy of it from the store. Oh, hey, by the way, that price tag, remember that, okay? That original price tag of 12 ringgit and 40 cents for this book. Yeah, so it would be easier for you to rent a copy of the movie on videotape from the store than it would be to rewatch a movie back in the cinema, especially when you're 12 years old. Or, if you had a rich friend who could buy the videotape, borrow it from him instead. Now, this adaptation was done by David Michelinie, one of my favorite writers at the time, and whose work on The Amazing Spider-Man was one of my favorite runs of all time. In fact, this adaptation came out a year after he did Amazing Spider-Man 300. Now, this adaptation from Marvel was also in bookstores at around the same time. Actually, I remember it was in the book section of the Parks and Grand department store located near my house. This book was, out about the same time the movie came out. And the bookstore was actually within walking distance of my parents' home. And I remember walking to the store for about a month, every other weekend, just to look at this thing, and knowing that I wanted to own it for myself. Now, this was the closest thing to a Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade movie tie-in collectible that I could get my hands on at the time, and I wanted it. But the thing is, it was 12 ringgit and 40 cents. Now, that sum of money was a whole lot, back in 1989. And let me tell you, even if you weren't a 12-year-old at the time, that was a lot of money. Okay, the average price of a standard comic book in 1989 was maybe about 2 ringgit and 50 cents. This magazine was like the equivalent of 6 comic books. Now, to buy it, you really have to love the source material, just to justify owning it. Now, the bookstore had about 3 or 4 copies, and the way that these would be laid out on the shelf, you could just pick them off and browse through them and maybe even read the whole thing in one standing session if you wanted to, unless the shop assistant took note of you and decided to remind you that reading in the store was strictly not allowed. I mean, they would let you browse through the stuff, but you can't just take an afternoon off standing around just to read a bunch of comics. You'd have to buy something as well. Also, I mentioned reading the thing in one standing session, standing instead of sitting down, because the bookstores that I remember back in the day didn't have comfortable seats or lounges or coffee and chill out areas like they do today. Now, if your feet were tired from standing around browsing at books and you felt like you needed to sit down, the floor was your best option. Yeah. Okay, but these days bookstores are a fading commodity, and most establishments go out of their way to make the customer or reader as comfortable as possible, because nobody's buying books anymore. Anyway, I knew that I would be saving up to get the copy for myself, so I decided to hide one of the copies that was in the best possible condition behind a stack of magazines and hoping that no one would find it. Hoping that it would still be there a month or so later when I finally had enough cash to come back and buy it. Now, let me reiterate, this wasn't the first comic book that I had ever read or owned, but it was the first comic I remember actually putting in the effort to save up my own money to buy. Now, I started getting into the interest and hobby of comic book collecting about a year and a half before that, but most of the books I would get were random copies of Amazing Spider Man, Captain America, and the G1 Transformers, and I would usually have help in getting these books from my dad and elder brother. But a premium piece like this Indiana Jones movie adaptation, now if I wanted it, it would have to be on my own effort, you know. It would, you know, maybe I could have asked my dad at the time, okay? But if he found out how much it cost, he might have been like, you know, 1240 for a comic book. Hey, how's your geography class coming along? Shouldn't you be focusing on your geography textbook instead? Yeah, you know. So I went back to the store again that one weekend, and you know what? There must have been a lot of people saving up to get copies of this adaptation because I saw that everything had somehow been stamped up, except for the copy that I had hidden away. And I felt that, it was just a matter of time before that too got discovered. Now, I was maybe about a few days away from hitting my goal of getting enough money together to buy this thing. So there was this girl that worked the counter at the books department, and I went up to her and asked her with the most pitiful face that I could put together on short notice. I asked her if she could hold it for me for maybe a few more days, and I would come back and buy it. I swear, she must have looked at the book like, what is the big deal with this thing? you know but you know what, she was cool about it and agreed to keep it under the counter and told me to ask for it when I came back again with the money. Well, just a few days later, I was all set. I went back to the store. The book was right there underneath the counter. I paid for it and I took it home. And man, let me tell you, okay, that feeling to finally own a book that you had your eye on for so long, I gotta say, even after seeing it, holding it, and going through it so many times at the store before this, nothing beats actually owning it for yourself and having the freedom to go through it at your leisure, comfortably within your own home, your own room, lying on your own bed and reading it. Nothing beats that, man. Okay, so that's my story. That's what I remember about that time when I saved up to buy my first comic book on my own. Thinking back, the book was awesome for its time, but I still just don't get how exactly it made it all the way up to 12 ringgit and 40 cents. It was maybe an 8 ringgit book tops. Yeah. But what are you gonna do, right? So, hey, that's it for me for today. If you stayed on through the entire video, thanks for your time. I hope you enjoyed the content, and I want to hear some of your memorable comic book collecting stories as well in the comment section. Yeah, let me know. Hit me up. Thanks, and I'll see you guys again soon with more videos.